then I have
Hello, dear friends. I'm very happy to be this evening with you. I hope that we can start right now. Probably someone will add, but a bit later, I guess. I understand that it is Friday evening, and probably some of you feel a bit tired, but it's class, and you will get interested into the topic of international environmental law. So today we will discuss this topic, and of course it is very popular all over the world because the United Nations discuss the problem of climate changes and so on very often. Before we start, I would like to ask if you have any questions that I may answer. Probably any questions about our articles. I would very important for the mankind, as I have already our last class. So that's why I'm really happy that you've chosen them, and I'm really happy that you will try to have a look at the literature and the books that I have sent you. Of course, use your disk that shared, and of course, I can provide some materials you need them, of course, and these materials will help you to provide the article. Any questions about our articles, about the plan of the article, about the topic? Probably I may answer, guys, or everything is clear.
I actually have a question.
Please, you are welcome, my dear.
So the topic you can choose, you don't have to choose international space law, right? You can choose any of the laws
Of
that we're
course,
going to. Okay.
yeah.
And the article, we have to, like, what's the prompt? Like, if we choose a topic, so what do we do with it? What do we talk about?
Okay, so if you have already chosen the topic, please send me the topic and send me your plan. And I will try to help you to correct probably the plan. And if you need any materials, I will try to send all the necessary materials. I will try to correct the article after we make the plan. So I guess we have to work together, make our articles absolutely perfect. So what your topic?
I haven't chosen one, but I just I want to know, like, what do we have to write about? With
Okay.
like
Okay.
when we choose a topic, what do we have to, like, is there a question we have to answer, or?
After you choose the topic, please send it to me. And then if it is difficult for you, I will try to help you to make the plan. So we can do it together. We can make a plan together if it is hard for your room. But anyways, I need to know your topic. I can provide an advice. You may have a look at our school's syllabus or our school page, and you can have a look at the classes that are provided for you. Probably you will get interested into another topics, into another classes, and in that way you can choose, for example, international environmental law or international criminal law or international economic law, or probably your topic will be close to your job. Um, where do you work or study? What is the sphere of your interest? Probably we can combine the sphere of interest with the topic of the article.
Well, actually, I don't work. I'm still in high school.
Oh, perfect. So what's the sphere of your interest in the high school?
Well, I'm interested, I guess, more in the international humanitarian, or like human rights law.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's interesting, really interesting. We will have two classes devoted to these topics. So we will have human rights law, international human rights law, and we will have the class that is called defending human rights. So one of my favorite topics. Probably you will get interested in it because during this class, I would like to provide something like colloquium, because during this class we have already experienced this technology, and during this class we try to discuss your topics of the articles in the sphere of defending human rights. For example, you can talk about the most famous procedures, judicial procedures, for example, that have happened in the International Court of Human Rights. You can
Yeah,
take one case and discuss it,
yeah.
probably. So there are many ways of formulate the topic of the article.
Mhm.
Probably we have to get to know a bit about national rights law, and
Yeah,
then you'll get interested with the topic.
yes, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Okay, so don't be in a hurry.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
from class to class, you'll get more knowledge and we will provide the article together. So our first steps, we have to find our topic. After we find our topic, we have to provide the plan. The plan according which we are going to write the article. course, we should remember about the abstract of the article, the keywords, of course, the text. But anyways, first,
Okay,
the
thank
topic,
you so much.
yeah, and the plan. Thank you, Maria. Any other questions? So, okay. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to ask. I'm always ready and I'm always happy to answer, because it gives me the idea that you get interested if you ask questions, for sure. And I'm very happy about it. And what we are going to do today? Today we are going to discuss a really interesting topic. And I will have some video about international environmental law, for sure. I want to mention that climate changes, greenhouse emissions, global warming, upsurge in the levels of pollution, technological advancements, and anthropogenic activities have constantly played a collective role in cleansing the environment, thereby causing disturbances in the ecological cycles. I guess you know this is from the international data complied with the report of the World Meteorological Organization feels 29 to be the second hottest year on the record after 26. But people say, as you know, that this year is also one of the hottest years whenever. The years from 2010 to 2019 have recorded the highest temperatures, as per the World Meteorological Organization statement on the state of the global climate in 2019. And the report on global climate change by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change warned the international market about the catastrophic consequences that the world would face if the global warming temperatures exceed 1.5 Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Oh, and I guess that exceed today. These diverse our concerns warns an immediate need of measures, methods, policies, and a set of comprehensive laws to regulate international cooperation from the nations towards the achievements of sustainable development goals. We will talk today about sustainable development. We will talk much because we know that the United States provided 17 sustainable development goals, and every country tries to follow these goals, achieve these goals, because they're important for the mankind. And of course, when we are talking about national environmental law, oh, I forgot to share the presentation. Sorry, I'll do it right now. First of all, I will show you a small presentation to make the main points, to make you understand the milestones of the international environmental law, and then the general things. And then we will turn to some particular aspects. So I'm going to share my presentation. It is very small, but everything will get, everyone will understand everything from this presentation. So, of course, there are 3 areas in which environmental degradation may occur, and you see these areas on your screen. Of course, we can talk about the states that affect the environment. Of course, we can say about air pollution, and of course we can say about the global economies. So you see here all the aspects of these three areas. Of course, today we will discuss the sources of international law. But before we start discussing the sources of international environmental law, I would like to discuss the meaning of international environmental law. The day before, I guess on Wednesday, right? On Wednesday, we have discussed international space, and I told you that international space law, the branch of international law. International law is provides us the general laws, the general order, and of course, the same situation happens in international environmental law, my friends. Please remember about that, and I hope that you remember that international law has two levels: global level and domestic level, the level of national law. So the same situation happens here. Anyway, international environment law is an international effort on the part of the nations to act within the framework of sustainable development to combat the issues causing a crisis on the environment. It is a part of public international law, monitoring the behavior of states towards subjects like ozone layer depletion, conservation of natural resources, preservation of flora and fauna, maintaining the ecological and ecological cycles. These laws, in fact, are soft laws that serve to influence and inspire member nations to comply with the standard norms and principles without compelling their enforcement. This is an outcome of the sovereignty concerns of the nations that make them reluctant in submitting control over them and their affairs to an external authority. The disputes arising out of international environmental law can be referred to the International Court of Justice and other arbitrations, provided that parties to the dispute have voluntarily submitted to their jurisdictions by such an agreement. Their forms, while adjudicating, have on the national to enforce their orders or awards. By the way, you can have a look through the practice of International Court of Justice and try to find some cases and discuss them in your own. So this is one of the ideas to talk about discussing human rights in the sphere of international environment. And I guess all of you know a very young girl. Do you know any girl that fights for international environmental law? He is a pupil. In fact, he's still a pupil. Do you know her?
Greta.
Greta.
Yeah, Greta. You are absolutely right, my friends. Greta. So you know that some people said that she's going to win the Nobel Prize, but I don't. I think that's impossible. Absolutely. Some people say that Greta not far from politics, but this theories because they are not of behind in this year. But still, Greta fights national environment about the situations that that are around us, and to fight these challenges, to face these challenges, we have to know the sources for sure. And we have different types of sources of international environmental law. First, there is no fixed international authority organization to create laws on the subject of the environment. These laws are a contribution of a right of created by different national bodies from time to time. We can have a look at the Statute of the International Court of Justice, and Article 38 provides with the list of sources to be referred by the court while adjudicating. These include international conventions, customs, set of general principles followed by the civilized nations, judicial options, opinions, and precedents of experts and commissions for the ascertainment of laws. Apart from the said resources, the lawmaking process can also be considered to formulate an opinion of the law. You know that we have written law and unwritten. As you see from this idea, the position, the opinion of the experts, the judicial system takes. So we have international conventions, treaties. They are sometimes called, it depends on the type of law. And we will discuss these sources of international environmental law. And of course, treaties are commonly known as conventions, agreements, protocols. They are the primary sources of international law. An agreement having a binding effect on its member nations or the international organization is a treaty. The evolved environmental have prioritized the use of the treaty law among nations. As a result, a plethora of multilateral and bilateral agreements have been entered into by the state. Some of the major treaties we will discuss today in a few minutes. Of course, the primary sources are conventions, as I have already mentioned, and customary law. And of course, we talked that about soft law, because for sure soft law is very important for us, because soft law is an important ancillary to these standard sources of international environmental law. Soft law is not a formal source of law for sure, but increased use has been made of it. In fact, it is not that, as we know them, it is the situation when states just came to the conclusion that they will do like this in some situation. This is what we call soft law, or it is all about the ideas of international organizations that they sign. They can sign some documents. They can sign, for example, declarations, and we will call them soft law. So, soft law includes, as I have mentioned, declarations, principles, and of course, international environmental law has its own principles, because most branches of international law have their own principles, and I will provide the video for you about principles. Of course, recommendations. For example, some organizations, governmental organizations, provide some recommendations how to this or that in different situations, how to behave in different situations, and of course some standards. We will discuss some of them, sure. And of course, international law is developing. It is not static, it is a dynamic branch of international law. And we have some milestones in the history of international environmental law. They are about disputes, judicial disputes, about trials, and of course about some organizations that regulate some spheres of international environmental law. You know all of them, I guess. The United Nations, UNESCO, Food and Agriculture Organization. So we will have a look at their work, of course, because it is very important for us. Of course, we have to remember the Conference on the Human Environment that provided us some foundation that is even today. And we will discuss some most popular conventions, for example, Vienna Convention that was signed in 1905. We'll talk about it in details, I guess. We will talk about moral and some other important international laws and parts of soft law. And of course, we should know about the World Commission on Environment and Development, because it is it provides, of course, that all the states follow. So these are our milestones that we are going to discuss, make you understand the international environmental law. And now we are going to talk in details about the main sources of international environmental law. And I would like to show you the video about the main idea that provided in every countries, and I don't know, probably you will tell me more about your countries, you share your knowledge with us. Every country provides the program on sustainable development, and of course every country tries to provide its own strategy following the Sustainable Development Program of the United Nations that lasts till 2030. So I would like to show you the video one, please. Okay.
It happens to everyone. Waiting in line for your morning coffee, you scroll social media and news on your phone. What you find depresses you. Thousands of migrants are fleeing a civil war, risking their lives only to be turned back at borders. Speculations have sent the housing markets into a frenzy, and employment numbers are tumbling down. Journalists have uncovered a decades-long cover-up of child abuse by coaches and doctors within competitive gymnastics in your country. Closing the news app, you open your family group chat. Maybe one of your siblings has posted something funny, and at this rate, you could use some cheering up. The group chat has blown up overnight, and what you see makes your heart sink. Bushfires are raging again, and there's one burning only 2 suburbs over from where your cousins live. Everyone is frantic with worry. At this point, you walk away, coffee in hand, tense, miserable, and confused. You think, this can't go on. Something needs to be done. Someone needs to step up. We need a plan to fix all this social injustice, economic chaos, and environmental destruction. This is where the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, come in. Fixing the kinds of problems that bring your entire day down in the morning coffee line can't happen in just one way. The SDGs cover sustainability from different angles: socially, economically, and environmentally. They set global goals for the 3 Ps: people, planet, and prosperity. The SDGs form the heart of the 2030 Agenda, an action plan adopted by all 193 countries of the United Nations. They call for decent jobs, quality education, good health, gender and income equality, clean energy and water, biodiversity, and climate action. They aim to reach sustainable development by 2030. Governments play a key role in achieving these goals, but they're not the only players. Businesses, civil society, Indigenous leaders, academia, and the general public all contribute as well. You might wonder where they came from. The SDGs were born in 2012 at the Rio +20, a UN conference on sustainable development in Rio de Janeiro, which was the largest conference ever held by the UN. Until 2012, there were different international agreements that dealt with environmental challenges such as climate change and biodiversity loss. And there were the Millennium Development Goals, MDGs, that aimed to achieve certain social targets in developing countries by the year 2015. The countries meeting at Rio +20 decided that a more comprehensive set of universal goals was needed to tackle the urgent social, economic, and environmental challenges facing the world. This kicked off the broadest consultation ever run by the UN. An unprecedented effort was made to get input from as many people as possible, particularly those who don't often get a say in international agreements. Over 10 million people around the world participated in the consultations and helped shape the SDGs. Apart from national governments, major stakeholder groups that were consulted included women, children and youth, Indigenous peoples, NGOs, local authorities, workers and trade unions, business and industry, scientific and technological community, and farmers. I am pleased to share some good news for people and planet, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said to a packed room of press delegates. The good news? After 3 years of negotiations and debate, 193 countries had agreed to a set of development goals more bold and ambitious than anything that has come before them, the SDGs. The due date for the SDGs is the year 2030, which makes the 2020s the decade to deliver. But how can we know if progress on any of these monumental issues has been made? The 17 SDGs are built on an evidence-based framework of 169 quantitative targets and 232 indicators that accompany them. This ensures that the SDGs are clear, concise, time-bound, and measurable, which helps governments and decision-makers to include the SDGs in their planning. This means that we can keep track on each of the SDGs' progress. To achieve the SDGs, all countries are expected to set up policies and investment plans, and to use the targets and indicators to track their progress. They then report their progress to the UN. This is done through voluntary national reviews, VNRs, with a selection of countries reporting each year. Most countries, including Australia, have already submitted their first VNR. Governments are crucial in achieving the SDGs because they create and finance policies that support the goals. But all stakeholders have an important role to play. Industries and businesses in finding solutions for goods and services that align with the SDGs, and communities and individuals in supporting SDG initiatives and in holding governments and the private sector to account. Education, research, and innovation are all essential to achieve the SDGs, so universities, with their ability to create and disseminate knowledge and solutions, play an absolutely vital role. You can probably already tell that reaching the SDGs will be no small feat. All responses, from the global to the national to the local, even down to the individual, need to be coherent and aligned. But progress to date has been slow, so that it becomes very clear now that a much deeper, faster, and more ambitious response is needed from governments, businesses, and communities. Many experts say that in order to achieve the SDGs, we need societal transformations now that are unprecedented in human history, and which represent a profound departure from business as usual. You may feel like the challenges are too big and too many. After all, you're just one person. But think about it this way. Every time you spend money, you have an opportunity to spend your money better. Every time you talk to someone, you have an opportunity to challenge their ideas for the better. You can seize these opportunities every day, 365 days a year. And of course, every couple of years, you have the opportunity to vote for the better. Not just in national elections, but in local ones too. That is an immense potential that lies with you and every other individual. The SDGs give us a roadmap for making the right choices and arriving at the right answers. Don't forget, together, we are 7.8 billion people. Together, we can make big changes happen.
So, dear friends, you have listened to the video about sustainable development and goals, you understood that sustainable development is very important international environment, because it provides the main goals for all countries that try to regulate and that try to implement international environmental law activities. And now we will try to discuss international environmental law in details, to discuss the main ideas of the sources of international law. We will talk about them. Yes, we will talk about organizations for environmental protection, the main treaties, and of course about the general principles. So, of course, there is a dispute about how we should call international environmental law or international environmental policy. For me, as a lawyer, I may say that we try to use international environmental law. Why so? Because of sources of international environmental law, because every branch has its own resources, its own object, and its own method. And international environmental law has all of them. So let's remember that we have some sources of international environmental law. We can talk about treaties. For example, we will talk about the Vienna Convention. It is one of the most famous treaties. I have already told you about it. It was signed in 1985. And we will talk about custom. You know that custom is, in fact, the oldest type of sources of law. In fact, custom takes place from the Roman law. You know that I'm as well the Roman law, and it is very interesting to see how the international law developed from the law of different countries. And in fact, it was called in many years ago, many centuries ago, it was called jus gentium. What is jus gentium? I guess that all of you know what is jus. Jus, in Latin words, it means law, because it's a Latin dead language, but still the lawyers in some cases use this dead language. In fact, the medicines also use Latin in pharmacy, in their work, and so on and so forth. So you know that custom is the source of law, especially of international law and international environmental law for sure. Of course, there's a general principle of they are very important for us because they provide us main ideas of international environmental law. We know judicial decisions. You can say that we are living in the world of a human system, but we shouldn't forget about precedents. I told you today that we need to discuss precedents because there are two systems in on the earth, two law systems. They are called Roman law, right? Or sometimes called Roman German law, and precedent. For example, most of us are the representatives of the first part of German system of, and this type of law uses us as the main source by law. Common laws, for example, Germany, France, Italy, Russia. In fact, some European countries, China as well, Japan for sure, Austria. So I guess that all of us, if I am not right, please correct me. I thank you for that. But as far as I remember, us represent of the law system of so precedent for means that we have no precedent. Most precedents, for example, of national courts, example of rights and international criminal courts, and some other courts that were provided for some cases, and we will discuss the decisions that were provided by these courts. And the main countries that practice this precedent system are Great Britain, the United States of America. So what can we see there? And why it happened so that they started to use precedents as a source? Know that in fact they didn't have enough legislation. That's why they tried to use precedents, the most popular precedents, as the source of law. Is that clear? I guess most of you know about these two systems of law. And for us, it is very important because international law combines all the principles. National law is upper than national law. That's why it's very interesting to see how the systems combine one global law, international law. So we use also decisions, for example, the decisions of the International Court of Rights, and discuss them. Of course, so we should follow voluntary agreements and hard and soft law. Hard law means treaties. Hard law because everything is written, everything is signed by the state. That is what we mean by hard law. Soft law is easier to change. Soft law is provided by the behavior of the organization. Sometimes it is not written, but still we follow. So the treaty are the written agreements to or more states, and we will talk about the main treaty. Sure. Also, there are some amendments to these treaties. Of course, we can have a look at some protocols, pacts, and so far. Of course, there are some interesting questions. You will look at them in details by yourself, I hope, because of course, treaties describe the main principles and the main environmental problems of international environmental law. And we can talk about main assets of treaties. Of course, they offer a superior framework for dealing with environmental issues by allowing for flexibility of lawmaking. That's what I have told you about hard law. Everything is written, but some treaties may be changed by the states. Of course, there are dispute resolution mechanisms. For example, the United States has different types of resolution, especially the United States. Treaties are reduced right and are therefore confronted with faster law, more accessible, and of course, we have the specific mechanism of entering into the force of a treaty. It depends on the country, different types, on the national legislation. It depends on the time of signing and on the national procedure of entering into force. Some countries have a very tough mechanism of entry into force. For example, in Russia, we have to follow our federal body, and it is a very long process, in fact. Of course, we should talk about reservations. A party to a treaty may enter into reservations to the extent that they are not prohibited. And reservations allow parties to agree to all the provisions of a treaty except those specified in the reservations. And here you see the example of this. It is a very interesting example from international environmental law. Of course, as I told you, most of treaties have amendments. Treaties may be amended where allowed by their provisions, but amendments in general do not enter into force unless ratified or accepted by all the parties. And the way of ratifying, again, entering into force, is the same as the treaty itself. So you understand that it is quite a long process. Here you see the structures and the ways of writing these amendments. Of course, much attention is paid to the interpretation of treaties, and there are different issues in this situation. And on the slide you see the general issues, because everything depends on the court, everything depends on the state, everything depends on the national legislation, and for sure on the position of the experts, because discussions happen often. For example, here you see some undetermined statements in here you see the Biodiversity Convention that contains some obligations such as far as possible and as appropriate, and in accordance with its particular condition and ability. So here you can discuss much, of course, and everything will depend on the judge when something happens, when someone commits an environmental crime. In fact, now we have environmental crimes in international environmental law. That's interesting because you know that there are different types of environmental crimes, and you know, I guess ecocide, this is one of the most harmful environmental crime, I guess so. Bioterrorism, it is one of the youngest crimes in our world. So we have responsible for our behavior, because it is very easy to harm, in fact, but we always have to remember about the responsibility of states, of ourselves as well. Of course, subjects empowered to interpret a treaty, you see that these are the courts mostly, and we talked today about International Court of Justice for sure, and we know some trials, judicial arbitral tribunals, for example, created by treaties such as the Climate Change Convention and the others, and of course we have quasi-judicial tribunals. And we can discuss some problems during the diplomatic conferences. And one of the most popular conferences that which ideas it took place in Stockholm. It was the Stockholm Conference on the Human Environment in 1972. The United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, in its first global conference in Stockholm in 1970, made a declaration. A declaration of the United States Conference on the Human Environment. So it addressed the environmental changes, and it was the first convention that provided challenges that we face. It attempted to promote economic growth along with sustainable development of the environment. It also addressed challenges faced by the developing countries due to lack of food and shelter, and the developed countries due to the process of rapid urbanization. So you see that this Stockholm conference was very important for us. Of course, some rules are provided by conventions, of course, and these conventions provide us all the necessary assistance, all the necessary tools, in fact. And first of all, we should talk about the Vienna Convention, as I have already mentioned it, that was signed in 1985, in fact. And it is very close to the United Nations Environment Program that have started in 1981. It seems like it was a draft to a global framework on the protection of the ozone layer. And this draft was concluded in 1985 and was called the Vienna Convention. It came into effect in 1988 with the ratification of Canada and is now recognized as the most widely accepted treaty in the United Nations. And the Vienna Convention provides the global framework for managing and controlling anthropogenic activities leading to stratospheric ozone depletion, with international cooperation in the same process and research activities as well. And this convention outlined the regulation of CFS in the atmosphere by the process of information and research outcomes amongst the nation, followed by the nation. So you see that these conventions important for mankind, and it provides us tools how to behave with our environment. Of course, it has the object and purpose. And here is the article 30. It allows supplementary means of interpretation where interpretation accorded to Article 31 leaves meaning ambiguous or obscure, or leads to a result that is manifestly absurd or unreasonable. The next is a custom. We have discussed custom for sure. It seems like an unwritten law, but we follow the unwritten laws, as I mentioned. And you can find these sorts of international environmental law in the Article 38 of the Statute of the International Justice Trust. Here you see evidence of a general practice accepted as a law. General practice, what does it mean? So the way we follow, the way states follow, and the way that is well known for all the states, all the actors of the process. So we still use customs in international law. So the evidence necessary to establish it drawn from national legislation, some notes, correspondence, statements, and even opinions of legal advisors. I think that some of you know the situation between, for example, the countries and some entrepreneurs. For example, we have an oil company, a huge oil company that is called UCOS, and UCOS tried to fight with the Russian Federation for money, for sure. And of course, the court tried to find the views of the experts in international law. And when I read the final decision of the International Court, of course, it was very interesting that the court described the opinion of every expert. That's very important. Of course, the court described all of them and came into its own conclusion. Of course, the experts do not influence it, but still they discuss, they try to interpret the positions of the convention, of the evidence, and so on. So that's very interesting to have a look at the positions, and in fact, all the final decisions published on the site of course. So you have a look at. And of course, opinion juris, it is also written in Latin. It is a subjective element for sure. If the practice is regarded as questionary or simply convenient or self-serving rather than obligatory, it doesn't possess the critical element of opinion juris, and it is not considered customary law. So, we should remember about this rule. And it is very important for us to remember the general principles of law. For example, we can find the implementation of general principles of law in different types of conventions, and even in the statutes of some courts, the general principles of law recognized by civilized nations. So we believe that every nation have its principles. Every nation, every state follows these principles because they are used all over the world. So we should talk about them in particular, for sure. When strictly interpreted, the general principles of law enjoy a variety of statutes with treaties and customs. Of course, the principles are used by courts in their decisions. I will show you a small video about principles in the way of in using international environment. National environmental law has its own specific principles, and we'll talk. Of course, we follow judicial decisions because we have the idea of following the practice, and here you see that many statutes write about judicial decisions, and when we do not have any law, we can follow the law practice. When we have lack of legislation, we follow the law practice that is close to our situation, to our problem. Judicial decisions play an important role for sure, but I cannot say in fact that it is like a custom. It is the practice because custom, it is something that is done by all the actors of the situation. The states follow the custom, the nations follow the custom, we as the physicians follow the custom. For example, non-governmental organizations them. But when we are talking about judicial decisions, when we are talking about judicial practice, it is only about judicial system. And who use these judicial costs, we may call is maybe something like judicial costs. That's why so, because they are used only by judges. That's of high importance in France. So they are not the ordinary costs. Of course, so we have discussed voluntary agreements in addition to international treaties. We have talked about them, and I told you about hard and soft law, as far as you remember. So keep in mind that hard law is something that is written, that is signed by the government, and when we are talking about hard law, we remember that it's all about these customs, and when we are talking about soft law, it includes declarations of principles, codes of practice, recommendations, guidelines, resolutions, standards. It doesn't matter who signed them, they do not need to be ratified. But when we are talking about the treaties, every treaty should be ratified after signing, because signing is not enough for the international law document. It is not enough to enter the treaty into force. We should ratify. Other way, going to fall, and we cannot use this treaty, and the states can use in its practice. So very states may feel just bound by provisions of soft law instruments. Soft law instruments are negotiated in a political climate, of course. So there are many ways of using soft law. But we have main challenges to international environmental law implementation, because negotiations, compromises are very ineffective. And most of the times, why so? Because the interests of states and the interests of corporations they conquer, in fact. And in this contest, I don't know win, because it is very hard from the one side, of course. It is very important to save the climate, to save the earth for the future, and from the other side, on the other hand, we may see that many organizations, especially huge corporations, they have some programs. You know that every huge corporation, for example, like especially oil corporations, gas corporations, automobile corporations. I know about Alcoa, I guess you know this huge corporation. For example, Rosneft, and of course there are many different types of international corporations. They try to provide the programs that they follow. For example, sustainable development programs. You know, I tried to read them, and of course they write much about sustainable development, about following the international environmental principles, but in fact, sometimes catastrophe happens. For example, when oil comes into water, into rivers or oceans or lakes or seas, and that's of course awful. Or when we have problems with ozone depletion, that is happened by the work of plants, fabrics, and so on. So, but they have the commercialist interest for sure, and in this way, state and commercial corporations should find the balance between their interests, because of course this activity, this industrial activity influences our nature, influences our climate, and so on. Of course, there are some innovative approaches to this implementation process, but they are very hard to implement for sure, because we are talking about new compliance mechanisms. They were described by the Basel Convention, Kyoto protocols, and we will try to talk a bit about them. They are very interesting, in fact. So to see that national environmental law is a very young branch of national law. I told you that international space law appeared in 1907, but when we are talking about international environmental law, it is younger, in fact. We are talking about international environmental law legally from, I guess, 1972, from the Stockholm Declaration, in fact. That's why we can say that it is even younger than international space law, for sure. That's why we have to provide some more legislation, because we don't have the mechanism of fighting these problems, of facing these challenges. And for example, about climate problems, we started to talk mostly from the Kyoto Protocol that was signed in 1992. Of course, we can talk about applications by domestic courts, because as I have already told you that we have levels also of international environmental law, global level and national level. For example, all the countries have their national legislation on environmental law, and of course it is based on international. And we have organizations for environmental law protection, for sure. Different types. We have global organizations, I guess everyone knows. For example, is the United Nations. We have regional organizations, for example, when we are talking about European environmental law, and we can read about it in Maastricht Protocol. So we can say that we have this part of law, and we have European Union law, and regional organizations in OECD follow the rules of international environmental law. Of course, we have a specific treaty organization and non-governmental organization. For example, Greenpeace, I guess everyone knows that this organization pays much attention to the global problems in general and in concrete situations. So we can talk about the United Nations that was founded in 1945, and its charter establishes 7 principal organs, including the General Assembly, the Security Council, and of course we should remember about Economic and Social Council and the International Court of Justice we have talked about. Of course, there are some specialized agencies of the United Nations, and they own juridical personality and may exercise rights and duties as subjects of international law. And there are many other global organizations. I guess you know that one of them is very popular, and about another I have talked today about the World Meteorological Organization, and we have talked today about UNESCO. But you know that World Health Organization also very good, and it pays also much attention to the climate problems. And I told you about such a time today as terrorism. So, you know, when some people had ideas about Corona, it is, I guess, the most popular topic today, but some people had an idea that it was something like terrorism, that it was the hand of some country that tried to make us ill, all of us ill. But I hope that it was not terrorism, because we do not have enough materials about that, and the decision follows. We shouldn't say that was some or any person is guilty for this crime, because of course it's impossible to my mind. I don't know what do you think about that, but for me it is impossible. So one of the most important of the United Nations environmental organizations is the United Nations Environmental Program. Of course, we talked about it. It was created by General Assembly resolution. Of course, there is the World Bank Group that provides money for the most popular programs, and these organizations provide us the financial mechanisms and technology transfers, and they try to realize the environmental strategy for sure. We can talk about judicial organizations, International Court of Justice, the International Law Commission, International Court of Human Rights as well. But we also have regional organizations. And we talked today about European Union, which has some attributes, and of course, the European Union has enacted a large number of environmental jurisdictions. So the European Union has the Council of Europe, OECD, as we discussed, and there are some other environmental regional organizations. For example, South Pacific Regional Environmental Program, Organization of American States. They include not only the United States of America, but both parts of America, South and North. We have specific treaty organizations. So for example, a number of them are called conferences and parties. And we talked today about the Montreal Protocol. You see here, it's on the slide. And of course, there are many non-governmental organizations. One of them is very popular, that is called the World Wildlife Fund. Probably someone gives money to this fund. I gave, in fact, because of course I like this fund, and I know that it very much the environment, in fact. And of course, for example, these funds have become established actors in the implementation of environmental law, and it is one of these funds that supports environment. Of course, there are many other non-governmental organizations, but anyways, they are not subjects of international law. But of course, we can read the judicial practice where some NGOs took part. So, what are the main treaties on international environmental law? I would like to show you a small video, and after that we will come back to the main points of sources of national environmental law. One more, please. By the way, guys, you are so silent today, so if you have any questions, you are very welcome, and I'm ready for them. Is everything clear? Okay.
Yes, everything's clear.
Thank you. So have a look at the small video. У меня почему-то не открыт.
While a desire to protect the environment is at the heart of environmental law, that desire can be seen right across populations in countries. That's because the environmental law is not just about valuing the environment, but protecting it so we as populations live within the carrying capacity of the earth. A better way to think about environmental law is as the law of environmental problems. Some problems are going to be very local, contaminated land. Others are going to be global, climate change. A common feature of environmental problems is that they are both physically complex and socially complex. They're physically complex because they involve ecosystems. If we put fertiliser on agricultural land and it runs off into rivers, a whole range of implications might happen for the natural environment and also for human health. But they're also socially complex. Environmental problems are often caused by a range of different people, not intending to harm the environment, but each of their actions contributing to an environmental problem. Nation-states play a significant role in environmental law, and that's because they have the authority and the capacity to develop collective responses in relation to these problems. Modern environmental law really has its roots in the 1960s, and it wasn't just a response to environmental problems, it was also part of a commitment to make societies more just, more fair, and more democratic. Environmental law is not a magic wand. It's not a case of passing a piece of legislation, signing a treaty, or a court deciding a case and an environmental problem disappears. What is required is the creation of legal frameworks which ensure the ongoing management of an environmental problem in as fair and just a way as possible. Environmental law is very technically complex. If you look at a textbook on the environmental law of any country, it's big, it's thick. And environmental lawyers need to know a lot of law, and they know how to apply it with nuance and sophistication. Environmental law has required the expansion of the legal imagination. That's because a lot of law hasn't developed with the environment and these type of collective action problems in mind. And so with the development of environmental law, we've had to think about different types of legal obligations. In countries such as India and New Zealand, there have been legal developments where the legal rights of rivers have been recognised. An important theme in environmental law is environmental justice. But environmental justice means many different things. It might mean justice between nations, justice across generations, justice within local communities, or even a form of justice that takes the rights of the earth into account. Environmental law is often controversial. We might debate whether there's an environmental problem, we might debate how to solve it, there may be issues about what is a legitimate role for government, And given the fact that environmental law often requires limiting people's behaviour, it will awake resentment. But while it is controversial, it is also necessary. And it's necessary, coming back to my first point, because we have to live within the carrying capacity of the Earth.
So here you have heard the milestones of international environmental law. The main challenges, the main ideas of international environmental law, and of course, it is this that we are talking about. And I would like to discuss some main acts of international environmental. So let's have a look at them. And first of all, we are going to talk about the treaties as well. I want you with the history, but we will talk, as you know, we'll talk about these acts of international space law. Of course, I will share with you this presentation, and if you get interested, you can read more about the historic background. But anyways, the ideas of international environmental law were born in the United States. We have talked about it, and the first main document of the Stockholm Protocol that I have already told you about. Of course, during these years, from 1945 to 1972, the main organizations were established: the Food and Agriculture Organization, UNESCO, and some others. And of course, in 1947, an Economic and Social Council resolution convened in the 1949 United Nations Conference on the Conservation and Utilization of Resources. This is one of the most important documents for us and for the international environmental law. So we can talk about main principles. First, some of them are written and discussed by the judicial decisions, and but most important is the Stockholm Protocol, because the significant elements of the definition, the attention to integration, the approach to national responsibility, and some other interesting facts. I will get faster because I would like to speak about more documents for sure, and I would like to talk about the Rio Protocol, because it was very important for us, and it is necessary to talk about the Rio Declaration in 1992 that appeared. And in fact, the UNCD confirmed the Stockholm Declaration in a global conference by 1992 Rio Declaration. It consolidated the previously laid principles and the declaration of a preamble and 27 human-oriented principles. It calls for international cooperation, combat poverty, and climate. And for example, principle to focused on the state's responsibility to prevent effect of its activities on the. However, these principles only have a persuasive value and are not obligatory. Still, these principles are important for us. For example, like good neighborliness, and the others. We can talk about Montevideo program. It is also necessary for us, and we are this program for sure. And there are some other programs. I will go faster because I would like to show you the other documents. For example, one moment. I want to talk about the Kyoto Protocol because it is very important and one of the most important documents about climate change, for sure. And the nation eventually realized that commitments set by the international organization were not adequate enough. Hence, an ad hoc committee was constituted to negotiate on the need those for adequate commitments on the nations manage the greenhouse gas emissions. And the final draft of the 1997, the city of Kyoto, in Japan. The framework outlined innovative mechanisms for firm assessment of the existing plans. And these protocols mandate the measures and policies adopted by the nations to achieve the minimum target of under Article 2 and 3. In the majority, it includes promoting the use of alternative forms of energy, phasing out of taxes and sides on emission potential, and controlling it from the source of falling under the aegis of Montreal Protocol, like that from marine and aviation fuels. The nations are required to follow these set policies, but the adverse effects of anthropogenic activities and quantify the Article 4 of the protocol sets out the procedures followed nations to meet the commitment. The parties are required to inform the Secretariat to date of acceptance and approval of the agreement. There is an obligation of all nations to correspond to the levels of emissions set by. Of course, there are some other protocols, for example, Biodiversity Convention from 1992. Of course, it is important for us. It is called as well Rio Declaration. And I would like to say some words about it because the UN Sdgs, and of course, it is still implemented in our legislation. I would like to show you a small video about the main principles of international environmental law that are implemented everywhere. And of course, you see them on the slide. And we have talked about sustainable development much. Of course, we have to prevent most of the harmful activities, but it's not possible for everyone. Bill, one moment, please.
In international environmental law, there are a number of principles that form the building blocks or norms of environmental law. Principles such as sustainable development, principles such as the polluter pays principle, the precautionary principle, common but differentiated responsibilities. There are a number of these. These principles have emerged over the last 30 to 50 years. Some are very well established and can be considered customary law or are given legal force through multilateral environmental agreements or other legal instruments. Some are emerging and continue to emerge. Principles such as in dubio pro natura, in case of doubt, decide for nature. Principles such as progression and non-regression. I'd like to take a couple of minutes just to talk about two of the principles in particular. The first, Principle 10 of the Rio Declaration. This was a principle alongside 26 other principles that were decided in the Rio Declaration, which says that environmental issues are best handled when there is public participation, when there is access to information, and when there are rights to remedies, judicial and administrative remedies. It's a principle that we can see on the international scale, not only through the Rio Declaration, but also taken up by UNEP's Governing Council in 2010 through the Bali Guidelines, which further articulated what this principle could mean. We also see Principle 10 given legal force through regional legal instruments. Most recently, the Escazú Agreement in Latin America and the Caribbean. Before that, we have the Aarhus Convention, technically not a regional agreement because it is open to all member states to accede or ratify. But these agreements give legal force to those three core principles of environmental democracy: the right to public participation, the right to information, and the right to remedies. At the national level is where we see this principle really taken up, most principally through environmental impact assessment legislation and also in the decisions of courts. And there are some seminal decisions, including the court in Costa Rica, which gave legal effect to this principle. Another principle that I think is worth mentioning is the idea and principle of non-regression and its corollary, progression. This is the idea that environmental laws should not backtrack or backslide. You should not go backwards in the level of environmental protection. At the international level, the origins of this principle come from international human rights law, and it's relatively new when we talk about non-regression in the field of international environmental law. However, we are seeing it taken up. Most recently, in 2016, at the IUCN World Conference on Environmental Rule of Law, there was a declaration that integrates this principle of non-regression. We also see it in international legal treaties such as UNCLOS, where in Article 136 there is a reference to this idea. On the flip side, progression is the idea that we should move forward in environmental law. Perhaps a really good example of this is the Paris Agreement. Article 4 talks about member states needing to become continually more ambitious in their nationally determined contributions. We also, again, see it in the IUCN Declaration on Environmental Rule of Law, where there is a specific call for laws to have the principle of progression integrated into them. So, in summary, we have a broad array of principles to varying degrees of legal effect and status. But these principles are fundamental to how we craft international, regional, and national legal responses to best manage our environment.
So, I hope that from this you understand the main principles of national environment law. I decided to show you this video because it wasn't right time, because I've already so these principles are important for the mankind, and we try to principles, and most of them is you can find them for example, one of the principles, the home the other one is there. They are formulated principles of sustainable development, and probably some of you would like to talk about right about development goals and the main documents that for the goals. So all the principles are on all the documents are principles. And summarize, I'd like to underline the fact that the growing environmental concerns encountered by the developed and developed resulted in the formulation of global instruments regulating international behavior, and the enforceability of these instruments depends upon the intention of the parties consenting to bond. Several organizations have started over the time to strengthen the environmental principles in the form of making it legal parties in the conditions outlined by the instrument to adopt. These efforts form convention protocols reflect a sense of legality, making parties responsible for their actions. And the main idea is that to make us, all of us, responsible for our environment, because we live on the earth and we are responsible for our planet. So, my dear friends, it was so, but I hope that some of you probably has any question. I'm ready to answer. Probably you have some ideas about national environmental law. So have some ideas about national legislation, but they did not say way of legislation. What do you think about it? Do you have any questions, guys?
I have a question.
Yeah, please, you're welcome.
Have there been like recent treaties that have been signed?
Good question. You know, I have a list of treaties. I decided to share it with you. And in fact, the youngest treaty took place in 1997. It was the Kyoto Protocol that I have already told you. Of course, so we can talk about sustainable development goals because they were signed in 2015, as far as I remember, and we have to achieve these goals in 2030. You may have a look at the United Nations site and you will see the goals there. And probably you can compare the program, Sustainable Development Program, that is written by the United Nations with your national program. Probably you will find something interesting. So I guess that we do not have any younger than the but still, Sustainable Development Program is not a treat. In fact, it's not a product, just a program, right? So if we're talking about hard law, right? I guess your question was about hard law, so we can speak about Kyoto Protocol. Thank you very much. It is a very important question. Why so? Because again, as we have already talked about space, and we haven't found any recent documents, no recent legislation at all. Only legislation that was many years ago, and I guess of course the world needs to be ruled by two dogs. So this is a good question because we are talking about the changing industries, we are talking about the changing economic situation, climate situation. So of course we need new legislation even on the national level, because something that happened in 1997 is not okay for us of this case.
Yeah, that's true.
Thank you for the question.
you.
Very popular. Thank you. Okay, any other questions, guys? Is everything clear? I hope that everything was clear. Thank you. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, of course, I'm always ready to answer. And you are always welcome to write. And you know that I typed my mail articles, and I hope that you will send me the final article, or you will send me, for example, the draft of the article to correct, for example, or you are going to send the plan of the article. It depends on you. You are always welcome. If you have questions, you just type. I will answer as soon as possible. I'm sorry if I'm not time, but you know that of course we are so busy because in spite of summer we are still working. That's life. So guys, any questions? Yes, my dear. Same here. Any other questions? So if you do not have any other questions, we may finish, I guess, and you will follow the cultural program. I wish that you will enjoy it, and I hope that you enjoyed the class. Tomorrow, we will study international economic law. It's very close with the international environmental law, and you have understood it. Because you saw some international organizations that are close to economy, because these spheres are close to each other. So we will talk about international economic law, its branches, because it also has branches, and we will talk about different international economic organizations that they are very active now because they participate in different spheres. We will talk about sciences because, of course, many states use them, and we will talk about investment for sure because even environment needs investment. So I hope that you will feel this branches of international. Okay, my friends. So thank you very much for your attention. I was very happy to see you all here. Thank you very much for coming even on Friday evening for some guys, for some guys, and it is the 23. So I wish you a good evening, perfect cultural program, and have a good time. Bye bye, my friends. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye, friends.